For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Rohrabacher of California. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following. Section, none of the funds made available in this act to the Department of Justice may be used with respect to any of the states of Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Illinois,
I ask unanimous
Iowa.
consent with not to have the reading, please.
Objection. Pursuant to Rule 287, the gentleman from California and a member of Pursuant to House Resolution 287, the gentleman from California and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 2 minutes.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much. Today, I ask my colleagues to make a practical as well as a principled vote. My amendment would prohibit any federal funds from being used to supersede state law in those states that have legalized the use of medical marijuana. Let's be clear. The intent of this amendment is to make it illegal for federal employees to engage in efforts to enforce federal law that makes the medical use or distribution of medical marijuana illegal in states where the use of marijuana for medical purposes has been made legal. The practical aspect of this vote is based on the realization that at a time of severely limited resources, it makes sense to target terrorists, criminals, and other threats to the American people rather than use federal law enforcement resources to prevent suffering and sick people from using a weed that may or may not alleviate their suffering. There are many examples, yes, anecdotal, where the use of marijuana has helped end severe suffering. Trying to prevent this use of marijuana once it has been legalized by a state government is a travesty, an inexcusable waste of our limited resources. That's the practical reason to vote for my amendment. As for the principle, we Republicans claim to base our decisions on individual freedom, states' rights as mandated by the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, and especially the doctor-patient relationship. Don't bother to use rhetoric about those principles on other issues if you vote for the federal government to supersede individual rights, states' rights, and the doctor-patient relationship when it comes to marijuana. Stop this waste of limited federal law enforcement resources. Stop the roughshod use of a federal bureaucracy from busting down doors. I yield myself another 10 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized.
Stop the roughshod use of federal bureaucracy from busting down doors to prevent sick people from using a substance that his or her doctor believes might alleviate his or her pain. Vote for the Rohrabacher amendment.
Time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana rise?
I rise to speak in opposition. I yield myself 1 minute and reserve the rest of my time.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I hear constantly this idea about individual rights, the 10th Amendment, et cetera. This was all settled back in 2005 in the Supreme Court. Gonzalez versus Raich, a 6-3 victory in favor of the government having preemptive rights when it comes to the drug laws, the CSA. So that's been settled. We can claim this over and over again, but bring it back to the court and see if you can change that. Now, how is this affecting us in real life? Well, it's now legal in Colorado, but Nebraska and Oklahoma is now suing Colorado. Why? Because of all of the problems that are developing across the state borders. Again, interstate commerce, a big problem. But let's talk about the huge problem that marijuana represents. First of all, it has no accepted medical use. Now, there are synthetic marijuana equivalents that are useful.
He was to yield himself
I ask
more
for
time.
30 more seconds, please.
Gentleman yields himself 30 more seconds.
Yes, indeed. But the drug itself, the smokable part of it, is not safe and has not been acceptable. But here's the things. It's known to have brain development alterations, schizophrenia, other forms of mental illness, psychosis, heart complications, increased risk of stroke. A study recently found even casual users experiencing severe brain abnormalities found on MRIs, and that pot smoking leads to loss of ambition, lower IQs, impairs
Gentleman's
attention,
time has expired.
judgment, and memory, and many other things. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California.
Yield Mr. Sam Farr 2 minutes.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much. I yield myself 30 seconds. Congress needs to represent the states that they were elected in. It's time that we represent them here in the United States Congress to allow medical marijuana laws in those states that have been approved by the voters and approved by their legislatures. 39 states, District of Columbia and Guam, 41 total, more than a majority of the American population. It's a states' rights issue. Support this amendment. I reserve the balance of my 2 minutes, and
The gentleman may not reserve. It's the gentleman from California's time. Does the gentleman from California reserve? The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
I still have
You just let me know who's next.
Barbara Lee.
Okay.
Gentleman from Louisiana.
How much time do I have left?
Louisiana has 3.5 minutes, and the gentleman from California has 2.25 minutes.
I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The supporters of this amendment claim that this is a states' rights issue. However, it's not that simple, not hardly. Drug manufacture and use is inherently an interstate problem. For example, we need look no further than one of the 2 states where marijuana has been legalized. The Colorado Department of Revenue has reported that 45% of marijuana sales in the state were to out-of-state ID holders. Indeed, earlier this year, Colorado Governor Hickenlooper said, "If I could have waved a wand the day after the election, I would have reversed the election and said this was a bad idea." In fact, Colorado is now being sued by Nebraska and Oklahoma, who claim Colorado has created a dangerous gap in the control of marijuana and that marijuana is flowing from Colorado to neighboring states. However, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, of far greater concern to me is the increased availability of marijuana to children, which will inevitably result from a loosening of restrictions on this dangerous drug. Though my colleagues may not like it, marijuana remains a Schedule I narcotic because it has a high potential for abuse and no legitimate medical use. In fact, Mr. Speaker, statistics show that 78% of the 2.4 million people who began using marijuana last year were aged 12 to 20. There is little doubt that this drug poses a significant danger to our children, and I urge a no vote on this amendment.
Does the gentleman from Louisiana reserve?
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
I yield 30 seconds to Barbara Lee.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from California.
Thank you. I want to thank the gentleman for yielding and for his leadership on this amendment. Of course, I rise in strong support of this bipartisan amendment. In states with medical marijuana laws, patients now face uncertainty regarding their treatment, and small business owners who have invested millions creating jobs and revenue have no assurances for the future. It's way past time for the Justice Department to stop its unwarranted persecution of medical marijuana and put its resources where they're truly needed. There's no way that members of Congress should tell the public, tell people who live in states where these laws have been passed that what their doctor prescribes for them that could prevent pain should not be allowed.
Does the gentleman yield more time?
Mr. Cohen.
Yeah,
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate all the work Mr. Rohrabacher and Mr. Farr have done, and happy to join with them. Justice Brandeis said the states are the laboratories of democracy. That's what they're doing here. Some of the arguments we've heard are reefer madness 2015. It's over. One of the gentlemen said children are doing marijuana at age 12. That'll show you how good the laws are doing right now. And if we had more money going into heroin and not marijuana, we could stop people from dying. And that's what we should be doing. Tell Montel Williams with MS marijuana doesn't work. Tell cancer patients it doesn't help them with nausea. Tell people that it doesn't work. It works. It's health. It's the states.
Time has expired. Gentleman from California. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
This amendment, to be clear, the way it's being talked about by some of the other side, it does not legalize marijuana. It simply ensures that the federal government doesn't waste its limited resources prosecuting men and women who are acting in compliance with state medical marijuana laws. That's all it does. It's very reasonable that states have enforcement priorities in this area, and we want our federal resources geared towards crime that we view as more important. Have them go after the meth lab. Have them go after the heroin ring. Colorado has had legal medical marijuana for nearly a decade. Some in our state are for it, some are against it. But it's our right as a state to determine that, and that's why I support this amendment.
Time has expired. The gentlewoman from Nevada.
Thank you. This amendment is about standing up for states' rights and protecting businesses, doctors, and patients who are acting legally under the medical marijuana laws of some 41 states and territories, including Nevada. Congress needs to catch up with state legislatures, and the federal government needs to stop wasting money busting good citizens who are trying to do the right thing. I yield back.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Louisiana.
Continue to reserve.
The gentleman from Louisiana continues to reserve. The gentleman from California.
Who has the right to close?
The gentleman from California has the right to close.
That's correct, and I will reserve that right.
The gentleman reserves his time.
I inquire how much time I have left.
The gentleman from Louisiana has 2 minutes, and the gentleman from California has 15 seconds.
Okay.
15 seconds.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Yes, thank you. Let me say, first of all, this whole idea of medical marijuana is a big joke. It's an end run around the laws. There are more pot shops in California than there are Starbucks or McDonald's, okay? Now, is it really a medical treatment? Well, the AMA says no. The American Society of Addiction Medicine says no. Even the American Glaucoma Society, which is, of course, in charge of glaucoma treatment, says that this is not a medical treatment for glaucoma. So there is no single approved use of marijuana for medical diseases. The whole idea about medical marijuana is to get around the laws on legalization or illegalization of marijuana. But make no mistake about it, the most common addiction diagnosis for young people admitted to drug treatment centers is addiction to marijuana. The rate is 9% addiction rates in users of adults. It's 17% in young people. And we all know the studies show very clearly that the states that are more permissive have higher addiction and abuse rates than any others. We also know that NIDA tells us that it's a developmental disease. What does that mean? It means that the more a child is and younger the child is exposed to it, the more likely that child will later become an addict to something else like methamphetamine, prescription drugs, heroin. So if you support this, which is really the legalization of marijuana, then you're really supporting allowing our children to be harmed and addicted to this terrible drug. Now, I'm all in favor of research. And we're in discussions with DEA about allowing it in some way, whether we go to a 1A category to allow such research. Some suggest that it may have some benefit for seizures. That's yet to be seen. Some suggest that it may be beneficial to those who have spastic muscle disease, but there's absolutely no proof of that. So with that, I urge everyone to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California has 15 seconds. Gentleman from California is recognized.
The gentleman would yield.
I would yield.
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Notwithstanding the doctor's remarks, the truth is that almost no research has been put into marijuana in terms of its medical efficacy. You have an epilepsy and a whole host of I'll yield for a minute. Yes, go ahead.
Dominate your time. This has been under study for over 40 years. My University of Mississippi, has been legally growing pot for over 40 years and studying it. So it has been studied for a long time.
Reclaiming my time, I know a little bit about this subject, right? So the bottom line is that in terms of its medical viability, in terms of epilepsy and a lot of other issues, there's some need for real study of this, not just about the way that we proceeded so far. And I think that this amendment and what is happening in the states should be allowed to go forward. And so I want to yield to my colleague from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, for an opportunity to close on this subject. A minute and a half, and at that point, then I would yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman may not yield blocks of time and must remain on his feet.
I yield a minute and a half to Mr. Rohrabacher.
The gentleman may not yield blocks of time.
I yield as much time as he may consume, as long as he doesn't go over a minute.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
I appreciate that from my colleague. Look, our founding fathers didn't want criminal justice to be handled by the federal government. I don't know what government you want to have in our country, but most of us here don't believe that the federal government needed at our founding fathers is an all-wise system. The federal government is the only government that has wisdom to make the decisions for the families. No, I will not.
Yep.
I will not. This is absolutely absurd to think that the federal government is going to mandate all of these things, even though the people of the states have made, and other doctors, many other doctors, would like to have the right to prescribe to their patients what they think is going to alleviate their suffering. No, we should not get in the way, and as I said in the first debate, it is sinful for us to try to get in the way between a doctor and his patient saying, oh no, the federal government knows better. This is a states' rights issue. This is the issue of what our founding fathers had in mind for this country, where the decisions would be made like this. They didn't want the federal government to have a police force that can bust in people's doors. No, they wanted to have individual freedom, personal choice. They want parents to take care of their kids. They didn't want an all-controlling nanny state to control our lives. That's what this country was supposed to be all about. I thought that's what Republicans were supposed to be all about. And I hope my Republican colleagues will start re-examining whether or not they believe in the fundamental principles of limited government and individual freedom that we've always talked about. So I had asked my colleagues to join me, reaffirm what our founding fathers had in mind, which is freedom, states' rights, limited government, and people making choices about their own lives and being responsible for their families and not shoving that off on the federal government. Thank you all very much for joining me.
Reclaiming the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I think I hear that echo again about the right to be left alone. I yield back.
The gentleman from California continues to have 15 seconds. Do you choose to yield back?
No, let me just say this. I've met
gentleman from California.
I just wish you would have talked to the very doctors and people I know that have been suffering, and they've gone to their doctor and asked for help, and the doctors have said, yes, medical marijuana will help you, to believe that the federal government can stop. And I have met people whose suffering has been alleviated. Some veterans I know have gone through seizures after seizure, and they were only helped by medical marijuana.
Gentleman's time has expired.
If we have a heart, if we have our beliefs, let's make sure that we stand for freedom in this vote.
The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.
I ask for a roll call vote.
The gentleman asked for a roll call. To Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed.